Hello, my name is Nikki Klein, and I'm a student physical therapist at University of Texas at El Paso. Today I'm going to explain the procedure of a systems review. A systems review is put into place to help the physical therapist identify any impairments on a patient upon evaluation. The physical therapist will start by introducing themselves and asking the patient questions about what brought them in today. In this video example, the patient is complaining about left knee pain when he collided with another player during one of his soccer games about 3 days ago. The physical therapist will then get verbal consent from the patient in order to proceed with the screening process. The therapist will start by taking anthropometric measurements to measure his height and weight. While the patient was getting up from the chair to walk to the scale, the therapist was observing his neuromuscular system by checking for any balance, gait, locomotion, or transfer impairments that he might have noticed. The physical therapist will then begin to check the patient's cardiovascular and pulmonary system by measuring his blood pressure, heart rate, and respiratory rate. The physical therapist will then ask the patient to take off his shoes and socks and to sit on the plinth to begin the cardiovascular and integumentary portion of the systems review. The therapist will do a quick scan of his body to check for any noticeable edema, ulcers, scarring, or for any discolorations of any kind. He will also check the skin integrity and hydration of the patient by applying a light pinch to both wrists and underneath the clavicle. Now the physical therapist is explaining to the patient that he will run through a series of quick tests to assess the musculoskeletal system. He will first start by testing gross range of motion and ask the patient to follow along with his instructions. The therapist will then evaluate his bilateral range of motion. He will start by looking at his shoulders and elbows, and then move on to his neck, wrists, fingers, hips, knees, ankles, and toes. He is looking for any kind of bilateral differences within these parts of the body. The therapist did not find any differences other than in his left knee extension and flexion. Now the physical therapist will go through a series of muscle strength testing, which is also a part of the musculoskeletal systems review. The therapist will instruct the patient again to resist against the movement that the therapist is applying. The therapist will hold each resisted test for 3 to 5 seconds. These muscle tests also assess bilateral differences, just like in the gross range of motion section previously. He is assessing his bilateral muscle strength at his shoulders, elbows, wrists, fingers, hips, knees, and toes. During this entire screening process, the physical therapist is also unknowingly screening the patient for any kind of communication and cognitive ability impairments. He is also screening for any emotional and behavioral responses that seem out of the ordinary. After all the testing is complete, the therapist then finishes up by telling the patient any impairments that seem to correlate with the reason for his visit or anything else that he may have found. He then proceeds to ask the patient if he has any follow-up questions or concerns about what they did today. Just for a quick recap, today we demonstrated how to do a full systems review, which started with anthropometric measurements while also evaluating the neuromuscular system. We then took vitals to evaluate the cardiovascular and pulmonary system. We then started to assess the skin integrity to measure his integumentary system. And then we finished the systems review with the gross musculoskeletal system assessment. Thanks for watching, and go Miners!